Hi, good evening. My name is Brad Coffey. I work at St. Joseph Hospital here in Bangor. Thank you for joining us. Last night, we had an excellent presentation from Professor James Linehan, and unfortunately, yours truly failed to record it. Professor Linehan has been most kind, and he is re-recording his presentation now so that others who weren't able to join us last night can hear the entire presentation. If we were live now with all of the members of the Art Commission, I would recognize them. So I'd like to recognize them in their absence. They are Katie Schaefer, Mary Hollister, Jean Dean, Kathy Lena, and Jeff Wallstrom. Here at St. Joe's, the Art Commission was established 7 years ago as an effort to bring to this community the arts that directly impact the patient care experience and help improve patient healing. The committee is a volunteer committee, and it works closely with hospital leadership. Now, art comes in many forms, and as you'll hear tonight, we host and curate shows at the gallery at 900 Broadway. We ensure art is available on demand in our patient rooms via the Mona Blitz art cart. We bring the Bangor Symphony into the hospital to perform for our patients on a regular basis. And we provide advice on ways to bring art throughout the hospital for benefit of patients, staff, and the community. We are very fortunate to have strong leadership in the form of Mary Preblo, the president of St. Joseph Hospital. Mary Preblo was the person who came up with the idea of the Arts Commission close to 10 years ago, and she has been a champion of the art program here at St. Joe's ever since. This year, we are very fortunate to have Quirk Auto and Quirk Chevrolet and the Maine Chevy dealers as our lead presenting sponsors of the Art Commission efforts at St. Joe's. Thank you so much to members of the Quirk family and Quirk Chevrolet and Quirk Auto for supporting the arts at St. Joe's. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to everyone who has been supportive of this program over many years. This program is funded entirely by private donations. We could not do this without the support of those who give. Now let me introduce Professor Linehan. Professor James Linehan is a professor of art and former chair of art at the University of Maine. He received his BFA in painting at Arizona State University in 1974, and he continued his studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he earned his master's in painting in 1976 and an MFA in 1978. Prior to moving to Maine in 1983, he taught for 5 years at St. Andrews College in North Carolina. Jim's art has been displayed at the I can't pronounce that correctly. You'll have to help me out, Jim. Acocasisco Gallery in Portland, Maine, the Gallery 357 in Rockland, Maine, the Vose Gallery in Boston, Massachusetts, the Sherry French Gallery in New York City. His work has been included in over 100 group shows and 20 solo shows in the past 15 years. He's completed 20 public commissions, including 15 for the Maine Arts Commission Percent for Art project, and is represented in 30 public and corporate collections. He's currently represented by Littlefield Gallery in Winter Harbor, Maine. And last night, we were very fortunate during the live presentation to be joined by Jane Littlefield. Part of the job of the Arts Commission is to determine whose art to show at the gallery at 900 Broadway. It's a pleasure for the committee members to do this. Our commission member, Jean Dean, who has taken classes with Professor Linehan, reached out to him earlier this year, and he very kindly offered to curate his own show at the gallery at 900. That show is now available for people to come and see. Welcome, Professor Linehan.
Well, thank you, Brad, and thanks really to the Creative Arts Committee that invited me in the St. Joseph program. I'm actually a neighbor of St. Joseph Hospital, and I've lived in Bangor for 36 years and have rarely shown here for different reasons, whatever. But I showed at a gallery at Clark House Gallery with Susan Mosh there many years ago, and then I've shown a lot at the university. But it's a real pleasure to be involved with a gallery that's right in town. So I should start off by describing, if you haven't seen the show, that the show is a modest show of works on paper, all landscapes with one exception, and that there's 14 pieces in the show, and I do a variety of things in addition to landscape painting, and I'll be showing you examples of different types of work. The question that a couple of the members of the committee asked me when we talked about what to show was, you know, like what makes Jim Linehan tick, how, you know, what goes into your work and what is it about, and that kind of a thing. So as I said, the show at the gallery right now is entirely landscapes, but I'm going to show you a lot of background about that, and then we'll get to the landscapes. So who is James Linehan? Like most people, I'm a product of the things I love, such as sunsets over the Penobscot River in my hometown of half my life. I've lived in Bangor. Next slide. Brad is nice enough to do the technical stuff here. So I love many things, and as an Irish Catholic young man, I admired and read a lot about James Joyce. Love James Joyce. I love my daughter's cat, Baby. I don't like cats, but Baby is the most inscrutable cat you've ever met, and anyway. So next slide, please. So the types of things that influence us and are around us and that we love you know, shape and change our lives. And as artists, we turn those things somehow into art. And of course, Buddha, I was raised Catholic, and I still consider myself a Catholic, but I also read a lot of books about Buddhism and collect some art. And then of course, lobster rolls. I live in Maine and I dearly love lobster rolls, too much to my detriment, but next slide. And of course, who doesn't love Christmas at home? We have a lovely 120-year-old house. And one of the great things about a town like Bangor, a city like Bangor, is that on a professor's salary, you can have a nice home and raise a family safely and have a good quality middle class life, and that's been something that I've enjoyed. My wife and I have 3 children, which I'll tell you about in a second. And so anyway, so we love Christmas at home. Next slide. Love the winter. When I first was interviewed to move up here, I was living in North Carolina at the time. I grew up in Boston, moved to Western New York, and then moved out to Arizona for the end of high school and luckily start of college at Arizona State, where they had a magnificent art school that was free. So that was good luck. Well, anyways, they apologized for the terrible weather, and I said I love it. I grew up near Boston, and I went to grad school in Wisconsin. So bring it on. And so here's after a big storm. This is our house, and the thing I want to point out in the picture is that the building in the back, the barn, it's an attached carriage barn from 1902, and that's my studio. So I've got 1,500 square feet of really delightful workspace that is my laboratory. Okay, next slide. And of course, if you live in Maine and you're old, you need a snowblower. And I always wondered about those guys that got out like with 2 inches of snow on the ground and they decided to plow the whole neighborhood. And I never understood that impetus until I got there. And now I love, I'll do the sidewalks up and down the street, and neighbors if they're away and so on. It's just so much fun. But that was my birthday present to myself on my 55th birthday in 2006. Next slide. Mainers understand these things. And I love college graduations. These are my darling daughters, Flynn on the left and Anna on the right. And Anna was graduating from Columbia, Flynn with a degree in MA in critical studies and art history. And Flynn herself has an MFA from Parsons. And and we have a son, Connor, and between the 3 kids, we have 7 degrees. And Anna, when she finishes her PhD, PhD in a few years at Penn, where she is now, will have 8. So that makes a dad proud. But it also informs the family. My wife's an art historian. I'm an artist. Flynn's an artist and an arts administrator. Anna's an art historian, and our son's Connor, odd person out, as a jazz guitarist. But it's we tried to convince him to avoid the arts or do something you can live on. But anyways, they're all pursuing their own paths, which are suitable, that dovetail with our paths. Next slide. And here's Connor on his guitar. He has a degree in jazz performance from the University of Southern Maine, and he's a real versatile wizard in a variety of genres. He really loves progressive jazz and traditional jazz, and he's also blossoming into a really successful teacher. He has a full stable of students, and even through COVID times, they all moved over to computer lessons, and he's got a full slate. Can't take another student at this point. And anyways, he's a great kid, and he inspires me. Every time I hear him play, he inspires me. Next slide. I was always inspired by our lovely dog, Sassy, who was with us for 14 years and passed away a couple of years ago, and we really miss her. But next slide. But these are the kinds of things that I know I share with lots of people, you know, of course they love their families and their dogs and so on, but I am a very blessed person and a very happy man. And the other thing about art world, a lot of art I think is cynical and world weary and harsh in a way. And I never like to go there with my art. I like to pursue kind of a peaceful path with it. So here's my wife and daughter Anna and I in Washington, and we loved our idea of a good family trip is not Disneyland and not a cruise, but go someplace where there's great art museums and go to an artist's home in the woods somewhere in Vermont and that kind of a thing. Next slide. And so we're probably, I guess I'm a pretty boring guy because it's kind of art from stem to stern, but I was an art student for 7 years, and I've been up till the age of 25, and then from 25 to 68, I've been a professor. I've been very lucky to be steadily employed that entire time, and I love the racket. And so I love New York City, of course, and the subway art at the 72nd Street station on the 2nd Avenue line. Chuck Close, it's a newly opened station, and Chuck Close did 12 huge mosaics. Believe it or not, this is a mosaic, and in that station. So you can see an entire Chuck Close exhibit by just going to the 72nd Street station. And I had the good fortune to meet Chuck Close once. I brought a class of students from North Carolina up to New York, and a friend of mine worked with him, so we were able to go to his studios. Hell of a nice guy, just an amazing, amazing person, and really one of the most vital artists in the country today. Next slide. I like new stuff and I love old stuff, and this is a Child Hassam painting. I don't know if you're familiar with Child Hassam, but he's a painter that I really love, and when you look at my paintings, I wish I could make them as vibrant as Child Hassam's, but the methodology of the kinds of strokes that he uses is something that I've looked at a lot. But this is a painting, he was a Boston-based artist around the turn of the century, last century, and he painted in Maine, but he also painted, his favorite place to paint was on Appledore Islands, the little series of islands off of New Hampshire coast. Next slide. And one of the things that happens with artists, at least with me, is that you form love affairs, attachments that are swoon-worthy with works of art. And when you go to a museum like the National Gallery in Washington, the first place I want to go in the old wing, the traditional, is to go see the Vermeer, Girl with the Red Hat. And when I go to, and you know, my senior senior mental block. I couldn't remember if this painting, Agapanthus by Claude Monet, is in the Museum of Modern Art or the Metropolitan, but it's in one of them. And I always make a beeline for this painting. Monet was going blind and was in his 80s when he painted this, and yet he just brought out this incredible energy. His paintings are quite large and very energetic and miasmic, you know, in the these and he had to work. He had special glasses built by some Swiss optometrists that were way ahead of their time, that allowed him to kind of conquer some of his visual problems. But I just find that this was done in 1919, and it precedes a lot of what happens in 20th century art, with the gesture and the expression and expressionism and the things that happen like with abstract expressionism and so on. Anyways, magnificent painting. But next slide. We form these love affairs. So when I go to the Portland Museum, I make a beeline for this painting by N.C. Wyeth. I owe a lot. I love N.C. Wyeth's paintings. I love all of the Wyeths. Jamie Wyeth's an amazing painter, and is the great Andrew Wyeth, of course, is. But I can't think of emulating Andrew Wyeth, but NC is just magnificent, and this painting here is just one of those things I think is like the perfect Maine landscape. And again, it's a touchstone, an icon that again I formed this very serious attachment to. Next slide. So artists and their art are made up of other people's art, and the art they fall in love with, and sometimes the art that they don't fall in love with. And one of the things I've been very fortunate, very blessed, as I said, to be a teacher for a long time, and I really love strange, bad paintings by my students. And I have many. I've taught about 4,500 students over my teaching career. But that's a rough estimate. Many, I've taught beginning painting almost every semester for all of those years. Sometimes the paintings are so bad that they're really good. And this is a nice example. And my apologies to Jessie, the young painter who made this particular painting. And she knows that I love her work. But when she painted this one and put it up in a critique, I just thought, well, that's the strangest thing I've seen in a while. And the flying saucers taking this woman up to be possessed into the flying saucer and so on. And many of her images are just kind of bizarre, and you don't want to ask, like, where'd that thing come from? But at any rate, I love both good and bad art, and art that's kind of good and bad. Next slide. So my life has been full of gems like this. This actually is by the same artist as the last picture, and it looks like what you probably think it looks like in the diamond there, and the explanations are often better, even better than the paintings. So as I've taught for 45 years, the process, it's really wonderful to have a job where every day that you're teaching surprises you. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes just bemusing, and sometimes it's hard to keep a straight face. And but I absolutely love the kind of process, and there's a synergy between teaching and making art, and often they get in the way. They're competing for my time and my energy and my life, but they also abet each other too. Next slide. So as I've gone along as an artist and as a teacher, I find myself at a time now, I'm half retired, and I am very involved always in visual things. I love visual things, love movies, and love art. And I've started collecting art, which is something I haven't really done before, other people's art. And one of the things, the oddball things that they're not that odd, but I got interested in was paint by number paintings, which I collect avidly. And I've got about 60 of them now, and I got 5 in the mail today, as a matter of fact. And it's an interesting thing. And as I looked at them more and considered them as creative topics, I realized that the creative process of, because an artist has to figure out how to make this paint by number work so that the amateur who's filling in the dots and circles there will know what to do, and that it will actually look like it's supposed to look, unless they change the colors. So there's some really clever color theory and painterly imagination in. I always talked about the language of painting. So my language usually is a strokey kind of hatching mark. And these paint by numbers always have this kind of noodle language that's not unlike what I do. Next slide, please. One of the funny things about, or interesting phenomena, is that when you look at a lot of paint by numbers, I've looked in, on eBay endlessly and other places, and I bought these mostly locally within the state of Maine, and is that you find several topics. You notice that there are several topics that are there like all the time. A lot of Jesus, and next slide, and a lot of clowns. I'm not trying to make any political point here or whatever. It's just an observation. But I said this to somebody who said, "Well, don't forget horses." I said, "Yeah, there are a lot of horses, and there's also there's other topics that come up quite a bit: hunting and fishing, and hunting dogs, a lot of dogs, a lot of horses." Okay, next slide. So as an artist, I found myself with a little bit of extra time, a little bit when I half retired, and I started looking around at things I really love and that were accessible. They don't actually cost that much money when you look around, and I call it bottom feeding. I go to antique stores and I go to different catalogs and things, and always buy like off the clearance rack, and am looking for good deals. So I started collecting Japanese prints, and I've collected about 50 of them so far. And here's a selection just sitting out on a table. And some of them are old prints. The ones with red at the top, all 3 of those prints are about 150 years old. The prints over to the right, the 2 Hokusai landscapes with people in them, are about 30 or 40 years old. They're reprints of famous pictures that are, were done 200 years ago, but they've been printed this century. And then the Hokusai woman, it's called a Beauty in Snow, is right hot off the presses. It was done fairly recently, printed, and yet it's printed exactly the way Hokusai would have printed it way back when. So there's these different tiers of age that you may find. In the parrot in the middle is also another newer reprint. They are licensed by the Japanese so that they are faithful to the original designs. In many cases, they use the same blocks, and when the blocks break down, they remake the exact same block so that they can make the same print, only they're new. Next slide. As I said, this is about my favorite one so far that's come in the door, and it's a really for me as a creative person trying to make pictures of my own. It's really fun to dive into a new territory, and for me the world of Japanese prints is quite new, and frankly it's kind of an addiction. It's a little bit like having a gambling addiction, I imagine, because I've been all of these collections of the paint by numbers and the Japanese prints, and then the next thing I'm going to show you have happened over the last about 4 or 5 months. I've been putting a lot of energy and saving my nickels and dimes. So next slide. This is where I started, though. I started just becoming curious about kind of forgotten prints that I would see in Maine antique stores. And sometimes you find a real gem in something that's actually really important. This is an etching by Kata Kollwitz, and if you don't know Kata Kollwitz, she could be described as the most famous German artist of the first half of the 20th century. And this girl praying is one of her most famous images, and it was languishing in a Maine antique store. This one was not, they were not giving away. I paid a decent price for it, but it was, I had researched it and it was well worth it. I'm really happy to have this like really famous print in my collection. And I've also found some nice prints by Georges Rouault and Honor Daumier. Next slide, we'll see our, so this is a wood engraving by Rouault from the about 1920s, 1926, I think it dates from. Next slide. And this is a lithograph by Daumier. These are interesting prints by Daumier. See, it says HD in the middle of this guy's coat over here. These prints were made for public consumption. They were printed in the equivalent to like a newspaper, kind of like a different types of art and popular, like Collier's or something like that, whatever they called it in France, and they're printed on kind of a thinner paper, and they weren't really meant to be fine art when they were made, but they are very collectible and very fine art, and I've got a couple of these, and I really just love the accessibility of them. Next slide. So back to the studio, back to my studio. So this is the inside of my studio with a large group of landscapes, or a bunch of landscapes in progress. And this is about 3 or 4 years ago. So that's what it looks like when I'm working on landscapes. And as I said, I do other things as well. So next slide. I've got a few slides from a show I had at the university that show a group of works that I did that are not landscapes, that are based on other ideas that I have and other ways of working. And this piece is 90 by 180 inches. It's a large diptych, and it's color on one side, black and white on the other, and the title is Cross Over. And you'll notice that there's a cross of roses with a bowl of fruit in the middle, and that it concerns the death of my parents, who my mother passed away in 2004 and my dad in 2008, so I figured out a way to kind of, or for me, this is a way to grieve for them, but also to praise them. Mom's stand-in is the Blessed Virgin, and Dad's stand-in is Jasper Johns. Jasper Johns, probably the most famous American artist living and working today. He's 91. Was born the same year as my dad, and they even looked alike to the point that I was painting these paintings of Jasper Johns, and they were in my studio, and someone who knew my dad said, "Is that your dad?" I said, no, that's Jasper Johns. And they didn't know who Jasper Johns was, but they thought it was my dad. But anyways, so these story types of paintings often weave together family history, spirituality, art, and other kinds of ideas. Next slide. Here's two paintings. The one on the left is kind of a Buddhist movement sort of a thing, and it's called On and On, how life moves on and on. And it is acrylic on canvas, and it's 7 feet square. And the one on the right is acrylic on paper, and that's called Checkered Past. And it's got that my favorite painting in the world, the Vermeer's Girl with the Red Hat. Of course, the Vermeer with the red hat, the actual painting is 7 by 9 inches, and this thing, of course, is billboard size. But next slide. So these are the kinds of things I do alternately. This was from a show in 2015, and so in my studio, I'll kind of flip over and I'll start to do just these types of paintings for a while, and then I'll go back to landscapes. These are three very large, they're 60 inches, 5 feet square, rose paintings. And these roses are become very important for me. My mother's name was Mary Rose, an Irish Catholic Bostonian, and she was known to the family as Roses. Next slide. And the roses paintings kind of took off for me. I had done a handful of the large things, the oh my God size, and then I started painting these more and more, and they became kind of mindless meditation in a way. When we put the show together for St. Joseph Gallery at 900 Broadway, the committee really liked the roses and included one. The one it's on the far right against the wall. You can't really see it, but it's got a blue background and a red rose painted on it. And they want to, and that serves as kind of a benediction in a sense to the show. It's the only thing that isn't a landscape in the show there. Next slide. So here's again another example. One of the things about the kind of mindless meditation, as I said, of painting the same thing over and over, is that you think about things like they're the same, and yet it's always different. And that kind of a thing, it's like prayer or exercise, that you kind of get into it and you do it. The thing as a painter to me that interests me most about these is the optics. In the next slide. So if we take that red painting that was in the middle there and we look at it, but only it, now it doesn't really come across the way you want it to come across maybe in a photograph. You have to see the painting in person, but the color harmony or disharmony between the complementary colors of blue, green, and red, orange are eye zapping. So they function that way, and painters know about the contrast. It's called the simultaneous contrast of color. When you use it, you can get this real eye banging, kind of headache inducing look from the right combination of colors. Next slide. So I find them continually fun to paint and interesting, the simple roses. The other thing that happened was a couple of years ago, I was having trouble on and off with, I've been dealing with chronic pain for over 10 years. And the most recent last 2 years, I've spent getting new knees replaced. So I have two titanium knees, and then arthritis and herniated discs and sciatica, and now I have arthritis in my hands that are causing some problems. But when I was talking to a therapist about just, oh, this is getting to be a drag, like always having something breaking or sore. And she said, why don't you paint your pain? And she said, I don't know what that means or how you would do it, but I'm not an artist, but it sounds to me like if you grappled with it in some way that you could maybe, deal with that in a healthy way. And so that's exactly what I started to do. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do. And I just started slapping paint down in a loose way. And as it happened, my right hand, my painting hand was out of commission for tidy work. So I was able to wear a hand brace and go like this. So I did this whole series, and I've painted about 100 of these pain paintings. And here's a sampling of them up. These are all acrylic on canvas. They're relatively small canvases. And next slide. Prior to the canvases, I had done a whole series on paper. I have about 50 paintings on paper that are framed under glass. They're a little hard to see, but you get the idea that they're they're fun exploration for me as a painter, because I'm not always an abstract artist, and this is the first time that I've stuck with it for a long time. And as I've said, I'm up my body count is up to about 100 of these. And the thing is, I never know what the painting will look like. I don't have a plan. I just start putting paint down, and you'll notice that I'd be really in trouble if they took my red away, because I do find that I use some of the same red and red orange and blue and blue green way too much, but that's what it is. Anyways, the fact that I'm painting on them as an exploratory kind of a thing and I don't know where I'm headed is really fun. Next slide. So we're back to the studio, and I love my studio when it's full of new paintings. So here we are. Those paintings that were on the wall in the previous studio shot are now finished. So that large landscape there, the largest canvas on the wall, that one is in a very fine collection at a home down in Northeast Harbor, a real pride of place in a 120-year-old shingle style cottage that overlooks the harbor, and really happy with that. And then the painting next to it in the white frame that's sitting on the floor, it's a walk in the woods. And that's actually in the State House right now. So you can, if you happen to be in the Maine State House, somewhere near the rotunda, they have an art program, and they put Maine artists in there, and you can find that painting hiding somewhere. Next slide. I really love the big ones, and I love conquering scale. So this particular painting is acrylic on paper, and it's 8 feet wide. It's 96 inches and 42 inches tall. It's in my studio right now. It's framed under plexiglass, and it's kind of a monster to lug around. So it hasn't been out of the barn much and shown, but it's I do really love. So I kind of switch off from small paintings to large paintings, and abstraction to representation. Next slide. And this is the biggest single canvas I've painted. It's 5 feet tall and 10 feet wide. It was Brooksville Hill, and it was purchased by MBNA, the credit card giant, and Charlie Cawley, the CEO, back when the company existed, and it's since been purchased by Bank of America. And I don't know where this particular painting is, where it resides now. It used to hang out in Belfast, but at any rate, this was a painting that I really dearly love, and it was really fun to paint a 10-foot canvas. I've done larger paintings for public murals, but this is the largest quote easel painting that I painted. The thing I want to point out is the middle square with the big tree in the center is a version of that is in the show at St. Joe's. Next slide. So I was asked to say something about how do you make these things, and this is how I make everything, all of the representational images that I do. So if I'm painting roses, if I'm painting the Buddha, I start the same way. I take a photograph, and in this case, I take lots and lots of landscape photos, and then I bring them home and look at them on my computer. And the nice thing about digital photography is that you can take, I mean, literally thousands of shots, unlike film photography where you had to be miserly about how many shots you took because film was expensive. So now you can take hundreds and hundreds of photos, which I do, and then look at them on the computer and decide which ones to print, and take them over to Staples and have nice prints made, and then winnow it down from there and pick out the 3 or 4 best ones that I'm going to make paintings from. So this is a painting, a canvas that's being started. It's about 4.5 feet tall, and there's the photograph for it. And I always start the same way, that I draw on with a paintbrush aided by a projector on the large ones. The little ones I lay out by hand, but anything over 3 or 4 feet I project, so I get all the proportions and everything. And so I put on essentially like the coloring book outlines, and then I start painting from there. Next slide. So here's an example in the studio out on a work table. I'll lay out these photos and I kind of go over them and I try to figure out which ones are going to make the best paintings. Just because it's a good looking landscape on a nice day doesn't mean it's going to make a good painting. And it's hard to say what's going to make a painting that's going to hold your interest and other people's. So right now, I'll show you the next canvas in just a second, but I'll point out that the most prominent photo of the tree kind of hanging out over those rocks there, the horizontal image. Next slide. Is the photo for this canvas, and this canvas is it's about 5.5 feet wide and 4 feet tall, and it's just looks just like that right now. I just put the outline on, and it looks kind of like a puzzle. Hey, it's almost like a paint by number. Next slide. So we're now at the show at St. Joe's, and I want to apologize for the quality of the photos because I had switched computers recently and I couldn't find my files that show. I have good studio shots of these particular paintings, but I couldn't find them, and they're in there somewhere. They're burrowed into a hard drive somewhere. But so I went over to the gallery and I took daytime shots with lots of reflective. So you'll notice that in each shot that there's a fat bald guy silhouette showing up in the middle there. Anyways, these are the first two paintings in the show, and they're the oldest ones. And for a long time, the first 10 years that I lived in Maine, I didn't paint normal landscapes. I painted landscapes that had I worked from photos of a landscape that I saw. In this case, I had a photo of a tree that was dying in the woods, and I thought it was interesting. I take this slide, and then I have a snapshot of it, and I painted it. So what's going on the right is that there's a kind of a gray field on the piece of paper, and then I painted. It's not actually collaged or taped on there. It's painted. And so there's a painted piece of tape and a painted postcard. And then on the left side is a painterly version from the photograph. So it's kind of a dialogue about what is representation and how do you tackle a landscape and make it meaningful and so on. Well, somewhere along the way, I got over my, in about 1993, I got over my fear of being normal and making like a traditional landscape. So next slide. So here is, you can see those two paintings I just had up are way over on the left. And then here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 landscapes on paper that are modest scale. And the first one in from the left there is that one I mentioned, that it's the big tree in the middle of the giant canvas. And then there are these others. I do apologize, you can't see them very well. I'm told that we're going to take better shots of them and post them on the hospital or somewhere on the website. So there'll be a way to see the show a little better if you don't have the opportunity to come to see it in person. Moving along, I think the next slide is, it's the other side. Yeah, so this is the other half of the show. Progressing through, and almost all of these, one of the things, I only have a couple of rules. I like to paint things that are not dramatic. I don't like sunsets and sunrises and storms and hurricanes and things. I like to paint a kind of I don't only paint sunny, I paint misty and gray days as well. But I like a kind of a calmness in the paintings I paint. So one of the paintings of a church there is a church that Marston Hartley painted in down East Maine. And I went to the church, found the one that was in several of his paintings and drawings, and took my own photographs and painted that. Right next to that is a really stunning view of blueberry fields that I caught at just the right time. It was just so green and so beautiful. It's called Brooksville Stones. The one with the big tree that seems to have like gray over it, it's actually kind of a wash. I had a painting that I really didn't like the way it was going, and I took a larger brush and I swabbed over with burnt sienna and kind of half wiped that off, and suddenly I thought, whoa, I love it, and I just left it that way. So it's fun to kind of play with the edges in a quiet way. Next slide. So this is the show, the painting that was used as the the emblem for the show, the icon, and it's called Days Like This. And the title comes from a Van Morrison song. A lot of times I'll be listening to Van Morrison or Dylan, and many of the paintings that I make have titles that come from come from those in different ways. And this is a beautiful spot out on Little Cranberry Island, a place I got to know a little bit because I showed at Dan Fernald and Katie Fernald's gallery out there, Islesford Artists, and a while back. And but I just love, to me, the peace and harmony of an image like this. And this is what I feel that my landscapes are about, is that I hope that I can imbue some of the sense of peace and meditative kind of centrality that that I feel when I'm making it. When you paint these with small strokes, it's kind of like doing needlepoint, which I also collect, and these little strokes, and there's a kind of a rhythm to it. And if you get the balance right, everything like looks right. And I'll be working on these and going dibby dab and dot dot and dash dash, and then suddenly you'll go, that's it. That was the last stroke. Oh my gosh, it's all together. And so I find peace and harmony in the rhythm of making or kind of stitching these things. And I hope that the viewer or the owner, takes them home, has them in a nice place where they can look at them once in a while and kind of just essentially meditate, because I find them to be vehicles of meditation in the making, and I hope they are in the enjoying. Next slide. This is one of my very favorite images and I don't know why, but I just thought it came together really well. And I like the relationship of the big rock and then the trees behind, and the kind of simplicity of that Maine. It epitomizes Maine, the glacial erratics, those big boulders that are sitting in the middle of fields. And there aren't that many places where you'll find that mix of the big spruce trees and the blueberries. Not that you can tell those are blueberries, but they are, and the big stones. And it's a very Maine kind of a look. So in spite of the fact that this looks like it could be any place or a lot of places in Maine, it is a very particular place. I'm a very literal painter. When I take a photograph, I copy the photograph and I really stick with it in my own kind of language. Next slide. So we've come full circle here. I've shown you a little bit about the show, told you a bit about my background, and here I am back in my studio, and this picture was taken in my studio about 3 days ago. So this is exactly what it looks like now, and I'm busy with my collecting in my half retirement. I go back to teaching in the fall, so as I said, this is exactly what my studio looks like, and in the next couple of days I'll be getting back to work go to landscape mode and start painting actively on this new fleet of landscapes. So you saw several that were just started. The ones along the top row that look more complete those are acrylic on canvas, and those are about half done. It takes a while. Sometimes people say, well, how long does it take you to do a painting? And if I ever did anything from start to finish at the same time, I would say that I could paint one of the larger landscapes in a couple of weeks. But the fact is that those canvases have been in progress for about 2 years now, and I just kind of like I'll get to it when I get to it. And I always work in batches. So it's like there's this whole batch of these. For the last year, I've done only the pain paintings. And then the next thing that I'm going to start into is the next batch, the pig through the python, as it were, of the landscape paintings, and I'll be starting on those. So that wraps it up, and thank you for your attention. I hope you made it to the end, and thanks once again to the sponsors at St. Joe's and the invitation. It's really been important to me to have a show in town and to share it with my community and neighbors and friends, and I hope that you'll get a chance to see the show if you haven't. But if you don't get to see the show, I hope you'll I hope you've enjoyed this thing. The one last thing I'll say is, if you want to see more of my work, you can go to littlefieldgallery.com, or you can go to my website, jameslinehanart.com, and you'll see lots of examples of the things here, and plus you'll see better versions of the paintings that are in the St. Joe's show in good photos in the both of those websites. Okay, thanks very much, and hope to see you again.